ever wish you could find a circle of successful business owners who just openly share what they did to get where they are? Challenges, perspectives, tough decisions, the good, the bad, the strategies, what worked and what definitely didn't? Because if you could, that would make your journey as CEO of your own small business a million times easier and less lonely. Welcome to Reaching Abundance. This is the only podcast where you get weekly cliff notes about developing mental fortitude from successful business owners who have positioned their podcast as the marketing arm of their business. I'm your host, Virginia Elder, fellow business owner and abundance enthusiast. Listening to this show will help you step up, play big, avoid pitfalls, and shift into a growth mindset as you build and market your business and pursue your own definition of abundance. Hey there, I'm your host, Virginia Elder, owner of Podcast Abundance, the leading provider of podcast audio and video production support for financial service professionals. This is the first of a 5-episode mini-series in which you'll hear directly from me about podcasting for your business. In my other episodes, you hear business building and podcasting tips, but in this mini-series, we're taking 3 steps back. I've received a few questions about what podcasting even is. Those questions include the following. If you have a YouTube channel, isn't that a podcast? Once you record your voice, what do you do with it? How do you get your show on a podcast app so people can listen? Do you need a videographer? Where do you put the videos once they're recorded? So in each of the 5 upcoming episodes, starting with this one, you can expect to hear about the following topics. 1, what podcasting really is and what you need to create a proper show. 2, why choose podcasting as your marketing method and how do you make it drive client acquisition? 3, how much money should you plan on spending on this marketing endeavor? And for how long? 4, what to say, how to structure your show, and how to use batch recording to your advantage. 5, repurposing and longevity tactics. We're going to talk social media, blogs, newsletters, FAQ episodes to send to clients, which is what I'm doing with this one. And we'll introduce our wagon wheel approach, using your marketing budget wisely. Get your notepad ready because I'm about to answer all your podcast questions from the top. First, let's talk about what podcasting really is. To fit the originally intended definition or method of podcasting, your show must have an audio element that's broadcast to various apps where people can listen. And that's done via RSS feed. An RSS feed is the link to your recordings that is distributed out to all of those podcast listening apps from one source. So to podcast, you record audio, upload your MP3 files to a podcast host account, and then use that source, your podcast host account, to distribute your audio episodes everywhere people listen to podcasts. Starting in 2004, what was referred to as an audio blog at the time became available on iPod. Remember those? It was being broadcast across the network, hence the name podcast. These days, there are exponentially more options in both listening apps and devices for consumers, and in styles and podcast host accounts for creators. So let's break those down a little. As a podcast host, you need a podcast host account where you'll upload your audio, title your episodes, add your cover art, write episode descriptions, and adjust the settings for your podcast. From inside this podcast host account, you set up connections to the listening apps and platforms that will broadcast your show. Listening apps are those familiar ones you've heard of, like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Amazon Music, and even Pandora. Believe it or not, there are nearly 20 platforms for podcast listening now. Having your host account and creating those connections to all those podcast platforms one time ensures that every time you upload and publish a new episode, your episode is automatically fed to all of those apps via the magical RSS feed. Your options for a podcast host account at this time include companies like Podbean, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Captivate, and Castos, with prices ranging between $5 and $30 per month, depending on the data amount and features you need. If you're having Podcast Abundance launch your show, we pay special attention to the settings inside your podcast host account and properly connect your RSS feed to every podcast player app available before your show launches. You are responsible for opening, paying for, and maintaining ownership of your podcast host account, and it should always remain set up under your name and email so you'll always have access to your show, no matter who's doing the post-production, edits, and scheduling. So now let's talk about the way video has begun to impact the definition of podcasting. To put it plainly, video adds an additional layer of complication. For the podcast host, because now you're behind the camera and worrying about what you look like in your background and about your video quality, but also for production, because video is edited differently and needs to be posted to different platforms. These additional factors aren't to be seen as barriers. You just need to be aware that there are more factors to consider when producing a video podcast than an audio-only show. It used to be that you were either a podcaster or a YouTuber. You either did audio or video. Now, people are recording weekly videos, posting them on YouTube, and calling that a podcast. A YouTube-only show doesn't have an audio-only version available via RSS feed to the typical podcast listening apps, so that's not really a podcast. However, consumers of video on YouTube have even started to change their language to say, "Oh yeah, I watched this podcast on YouTube." Kudos to Google for pressing video results to the top of their search results and making videos so widely accessible. Since about 2020, we've seen a big push toward video, leading to a term called video-first podcasting. This is where podcasts that used to be audio only and that are available on listening apps are now also being recorded in video. Edits are being done with the visual results of the video as the production team's primary focus. In 2024, YouTube officially added the RSS feature to creators' channels. So now podcasters can connect that RSS feed and have their audio-only show on YouTube as well. It works the same way as it does now with any podcast app. Each time you upload an episode to your podcast host account, it's automatically pushed to any platform you have connected using that RSS feed. And now YouTube has got their hand in the game. Most people don't know this, but Apple Podcasts have had the capability to host video podcasts for years. But now Spotify does too. And of course, there's YouTube, like we were just talking about. So at this point, as a creator and host of your own show, You have a variety of choices when it comes to educating and reaching your ideal audience members. You can produce an audio-only podcast. Those platforms and that listenership and entire podcast industry is still growing like crazy year after year. You can also choose to record video at the same time you're recording your audio, like I am now. Recording video gives you the opportunity to capture a different group of people that may not listen to audio podcasts, but might consume your content on YouTube. That's a key piece of knowledge about reaching your ideal viewer or listener. Audio-only podcast listeners who use apps to listen while they drive, jog, or do dishes are different than the group of people who will consume your videos on YouTube. It's not an overlap. It's two different groups of people. The other advantage to recording video is the ability to repurpose the recordings on social media as Reels, as YouTube Shorts, on your website, and in your newsletters. To directly answer some of the questions I get most often about what is a podcast and how do you podcast properly. Just having a YouTube channel is not the same as having a podcast. Podcasts may be available on video, but most importantly, podcasts are available in audio on a consumer's cell phone and are syndicated via RSS feed from your podcast host account to the various listening platforms. If you want to include YouTube or other video platforms in your distribution, you totally can. You don't necessarily need a videographer to create a podcast. Depending on the quality you want to produce, your budget, and what you plan to do with those videos, you can hire a videographer. Even if you're recording audio only, you can go to a sound studio. Some of my clients choose to go that route and record in studio with a videographer, with all the lighting and expensive equipment in the whole 9 yards, while others choose to record with very simple equipment at home or in their office. There's no wrong way to do it as long as your selections align with your goals for your show and your time and your budget. So, think deeply about what's most important to you regarding your podcast. Is it sustainable for you to get on video multiple times a month? Can you record at home in your office? Or do you need a studio setting or a videographer? The main things you need to get started with podcasting are a podcast host account, a microphone, and the ability to record and manipulate your audio recordings into an MP3 file so that you can upload them into your podcast host account. Now, I did run into someone who thought they had a podcast because they were recording audio into a podcast host account. However, listeners couldn't find it because the additional steps hadn't been taken to distribute the audio out to apps like Apple and Spotify and Amazon Music. So just like you've heard those heartbreaking stories about people, quote unquote, investing in their 401k, only to find that their money was just in a cash holding account and not really invested in the market, you want to take these steps to thoroughly distribute your show, or at least have someone do it for you inside your podcast host account. If you do want to do video, you need good lighting, a good camera, and a microphone. You can use the camera in your cell phone, or you can purchase a great vlogger style camera on Amazon for about $600. You still need a podcast host account and a YouTube creator account. When we're onboarding a new podcast client through Podcast Abundance, whether they're launching a new show or whether we're taking over the post-production of an existing show, we walk together through a series of questions to uncover the podcast host's vision for their podcast. It's in this process where we learn whether the creator wants audio or video or both, and whether they've set up a podcast host account, with whom, and whether they have a YouTube channel already. So if any of the above is confusing, or you don't have time or the bandwidth to do it yourself, that's totally fine. That's why Podcast Abundance was created. We set up your accounts, properly adjust your settings so that your show is actually distributed to all of the podcast platforms. We edit and post your episodes so that you don't have to do any of this. As the podcast host, you're just responsible for the content creation piece. This includes the ideation of topics, scripting or outlining episodes, scheduling interviews, and recording the episode content. Every future potential action, like editing and posting, getting your brand visible, or even the pride you'll feel when you get to say, I have a podcast, can't happen until you record. No matter what, your first few recordings feel clunky. You may forget to turn on your mic or hit record on one of the cameras, or struggle to figure out where the audio files got saved on your computer. It's all part of the learning curve and completely normal. As the podcast management team, we are responsible for editing your audio and or video, coming up with great titles for your episodes, drafting compelling episode descriptions, and repurposing your episode based on our agreement. During our audio and video editing process, we're removing background noise, echo or reverb, correcting color, and editing the dialogue so no one will ever know about your mispronunciations or mistakes, because we want to ensure you're featured as the most knowledgeable, professional, confident version of yourself. To recap, what is a podcast? It's a consistently produced audio or video recording that's distributed using an RSS feed to various listening apps and even YouTube. The purpose of a podcast for financial services professionals is often to educate their listeners. Podcasts also just naturally work to attract ideal clients, though, because the more often they hear your voice and receive good information from you, the more they trust you. That's it for today. Next week, I'll answer your questions about how to effectively use podcasting as your marketing method for your business. As this episode comes to a close, I'd love to know which piece of this conversation made an impact on you. Send a message to me at reachingabundance.com/convo. For your convenience, the link is in the episode description. This show is edited and published on YouTube and all podcast apps by podcastabundance.com, and we are taking clients. When you're ready to effectively and efficiently market your business using a podcast, book a call with me by clicking the Book a Call link in the episode description. Thank you for spending your time with me and listening to Reaching Abundance. I'm your host, Virginia Elder. I'll be back next week with another amazing guest to help you build your business, navigate mindset shifts, establish growth-oriented habits, and effectively leverage online marketing. In the meantime, keep up with me and my guests on Instagram at Podcast Abundance.